get started. Okay, before we start, is there any questions about the assignment, which probably a lot of you have done already, but you might not have if you've slipped, or about last lecture?
When can we expect the grades?
It usually takes 2 weeks, so yeah. The grades will be uploaded on EAS. Other questions? I don't personally mark the assignments either, so there's a TA that will mark them. Okay, let me show you one last thing from the SSL tree. When we went through the tree at the very end, I realized I had not covered this particular attack. It's pretty simple, but it's kind of neat because it's like a completely different way of thinking of attacking SSL. So this is the picture I just put in from the notes from last year, so it has the full content. But imagine you go to a website and let's say that as an adversary, I'm able to redirect you to a site of my choosing. So you're on my site, I control it. You don't know it's malicious, but I control it. Because it's my site, I can have an SSL certificate. SSL doesn't mean that the site is trustworthy or the people that run it are honest or anything like that. It just means that you have a mathematical cryptographic connection to the site. That's all it means. It's not an endorsement of trust. So it is my domain, therefore I could have SSL. Okay? So imagine I have a website that looks like this, and there's like a button. For whatever reason, I want you to sign into Facebook from my website. And so there's a button, and you click on it, and then a pop-up shows up. And the pop-up is like a little browser window, and it has facebook.com. It has the SSL lock indicating that this is a secure connection, and it's asking for the username and the password. Okay, so could the username and password that you type into this be intercepted by an adversary that's in a man-in-the-middle position? So if this is truly a pop-up, it can't, right? It's a new browser window. It's going to facebook.com. There is a lock. Just because I prompted the pop-up to appear doesn't give me control over the SSL that pop-up will form with the server, okay? But in this particular attack that was called a picture-in-picture attack, what happened is that this was not actually a pop-up window, okay? What this was the website itself creating a square inside the website that looked like a pop-up window, okay? So what a website could do is just think of it as an image. They could just drop an image like right there, right? Like when you click the sign on button, it just puts an image there, okay? Looks like a browser window. It has like the little close sign and the open and maximize types of things. And with JavaScript, you could actually get fancy and you could have it so like even if you dragged it and moved it around, it would like move. But you couldn't move it off the edge of the browser, right? Because it's inside the content of the page. So that would be the tip-off that this wasn't a real pop-up window, that this was something that the browser was created. So we call it the Chrome, which is the sort of box that surrounds the browser. So like where all the buttons are and like the sidebar and all of that stuff, that's called the Chrome of the browser. And so if you tried to drag it out of the Chrome of the browser, then you would notice that it wasn't truly a browser window. And I'm sure if you start pressing the other buttons, but the point is that you're going so fast that you click sign up, there's this thing, it looks like a pop-up, and then you put your username and password in and you don't really engage with it. You're not thinking skeptically about whether this is a pop-up window or not. Now, as a result of this kind of attacks, what browsers did is they actually more or less disabled pop-up windows. So now things open in a new tab, right? So it forces you into a new tab. The tab itself is in the Chrome of the browser. So you would switch from one tab to another. So you would see a shift in the Chrome of the browser. And that's an indication to you that, hey, this is truly a new window. This isn't something that the content of the website created. Okay. So anyway, so that's another way. So if you could lure your victim onto your own website, you had some reason why legitimately they might want to log into something like Facebook from your website, then you could intercept it even though there's a lock. The lock is just a picture on the website. It doesn't mean anything. There's no secure connection to Facebook. So anyway, so that's another thing you could do if you don't have an SSL certificate for Facebook. Okay, so we can put this together and we can put it in an attack tree. So I showed you what the attack tree looks like. It's pretty involved. And what are the main takeaways from doing this big exercise on attack trees? So first, we did a thorough example. So it was meant to showcase like what a sort of production level attack tree would look like, not the kind of cute example of like getting out of the parking lot without pain. Attack trees are good because there's a wide breadth of attacks. So we considered technical attacks at like the crypto level. We considered tricking people with social engineering. We considered governments using legal like mechanisms. Like basically any attack you can think of, it's open, and an attack tree can capture it. So there's a lot of methodologies that you might use that are good for capturing technical attacks. But if you have some sort of non-technical attack, you can't really capture it with that method. So this method is good for capturing basically any kind of attack that you can think of. It's not limited to technical attacks. And we have seen a trend in security of people moving away from technical attacks, or at least maybe a combination of some sort of technical attack with a non-technical attack. And today we're going to talk about social engineering, which is one type of non-technical attack that you might do. The tree itself, like you could just list all the attacks, just enumerate them, right? But the tree, it gives some structure. You're like, okay, first I want to learn what I can without breaking into the tunnel. And then there's 3 or 4 attacks, and then you can see how they relate to each other. Or now I'm going to break the crypto, and here's 5 of them. Okay, so it gives you a way to sort of organize your attacks. So that's why a tree is better than just a simple list. You can kind of see how the attacks compare to other attacks that are similar to them. It's also easier to maybe come up, like if you're coming up with the examples yourself, you're brainstorming them, it's sometimes easier to have that structure, right? Because you see, okay, I want to break into the tunnel, but the crypto's preventing me. So now I want to break the crypto, and there's this attack that attacked the implementation. What else could I do? Oh, maybe I could do this, or maybe there's another way of attacking the implementation. So when you get the tree sort of partially sketched in, then you can start thinking about like, are there things that are kind of branches that are closely related to the stuff I already have to kind of flesh out the tree? Whereas if it's just a list, it's a lot harder to see like if there's other variants on sort of what you did. And the last thing about a tree is when you move from a leaf of the tree, so the leaf is the furthest thing, that's the actual attack, right? Like beast, that's an attack. And if you move from the root of the tree, it kind of tells a story, right? So I want to break SSL from a man in the middle position. I'm going to do it by breaking into the tunnel. I need to capture a cryptographic key. I'm going to do that by attacking the implementation of the client. And I'm going to get them to, I don't know, downgrade their SSL or whatever. So there's a sort of complete story. And it's kind of like you want to do this, but this thing stops you. Like I want to break in the tunnel, but the crypto's stopping me. So now I want to break the crypto, but I need a key, right? So the key's stopping me. I don't know the key. Now I'm going to get the key by doing this attack, right? And so often when you go down the branch too, it's sort of like attack, defense, attack, defense, attack, defense, and then finally you get to an actual attack. Okay, so that's it. That's all I wanted to say about attack trees and about SSL. This is a last chance for any questions you might have or comments. Okay, all right, so great. So this is another methodology. So far we've sort of looked at 3 methodologies. We looked at evaluation frameworks. We looked at evaluation frameworks, attack trees, and stride. So now we're going to switch gears completely. I'm going to show you some other methodologies. So now what I want to talk about is social engineering. So this is another kind of attack that we've seen. It became very emergent, especially in the last 5 years. And a lot of it's maybe in reaction to technical measures getting very strong. So now there's a lot of like well thought out policies and procedures and actual technical like servers and encryption and firewalls and like those types of stuff, infrastructure that protects security. And so as a result, people are looking for other ways to get access to things that they want access to. And one of the ways is to go through humans. So humans often have access, and if you can sort of be the right human or convince the right human, then there might be a way around a sort of technical measure. Okay. So I'll write down a definition of social engineering that we can play with. Okay, so it's very simply, you want to gain access where there's a human and they're screening whether you get access or not. Sometimes this is very explicit, like, there's a security guard that's sitting outside of a door, right? So it's very obvious that this person is there, they're screening access to whether or not you can enter this particular room. Sometimes it's more implicit, right? Like if we think about SSL, how do I get a certificate in the certificate store? It sounds like very technical, like there's files and certificate files and keys and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like there are some people that sit at Apple and Microsoft and Google, and they decide at the end of the day whether you get into the certificate or not, into the certificate store or not. So it's sort of kind of at the bottom of all the technical measures, there is some human decision that's being made. So that would be more of an implicit human decision because it's not so obvious up front. It's not like a security guard that's standing in front of a room. So we're happy in either scenario to analyze the situation. The reason we're looking at social engineering is because it's very prevalent today. And it's also hard to study. So there's no, like, if you say you wrote down, okay, who gets access to this room, and you wrote down all the things that are involved in it, there's no like mathematical model that's going to spit out, yeah, that's secure, or no, that's not secure. Okay, so analysis of scenarios involving humans are still It's something you sort of do manually. Like you sort of look at it, you use your intuition, and then you decide. There is no established methodology. So unlike Stride evaluation frameworks and attack trees, I'm not going to give you a methodology in this section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an intuition about what social engineering is, what it looks like. I'll tell you some stories about where it happened. And so I'm hoping that you learn enough about it that you think about these issues when you're evaluating security. But I don't have the equivalent of an attack tree for social engineering. You could certainly use an attack tree, actually, for social engineering, and an attack tree can capture it. But yeah, and a lot of social engineering, as you see, it will, it's hard to capture because there's a lot of things, like you might have a policy that's in place, but there's a lot of times where that policy wouldn't be followed. Okay, there's a lot of exceptions to that rule, and it's really hard to think of every possible exception to the rule. So that's why it gets hard. But we'll give some examples of that later. So let me give you some quick examples just so we sort of know what we're talking about for social engineering. Then I'll give you a framework for breaking down a social engineering attack into 3 components and thinking about each of those components. So we saw in SSL that if you want an EV certificate, there's an in-person validation process. So that would be an example where you could apply social engineering. I've said it a few times, but like the example we sometimes use is like you're going to impersonate an IT staff to get access to a server room. Another example are called road apples. And so the idea here is, let's say that I want to infiltrate a network of a company, but I don't have physical access to the company. So what I might do is leave some USB keys lying around the parking lot. And maybe there's some malware I have like knowledge of a 0-day or something like that. And so I just leave them. And what will happen is someone will see it, they'll pick it up, and they'll think, oh, I should give this back to whoever it belongs to. So they'll go in, they'll sit down at their computer, they'll plug it in just to see what's on it. You know, maybe there's a name, maybe there's a document or something like that. Then the malware infects the computer. And then now that's a starting point for an attack anyways. So lots of companies have policies like basically like never plug a USB key in ever, even if it's your own personal one. Sphere phishing. So this is something that we've seen even here at Concordia. I've gotten emails from the dean, like my boss, essentially like saying, can you go buy some gift cards because I'm stuck in a meeting. And so malicious emails. So there's different types of scams. So it could be that they have malware. So there's like an attachment. So they just want you to look at something. Sometimes they want you to take an action. That usually involves the transfer of money or personal information. Spear phishing is the sort of more sophisticated version where, to some extent, less now, you can spoof email addresses. So you could actually write an email that looks like it came from a particular email address, like say the dean of Concordia. Now, email security has gotten better in the last 5 years, and so there are some protections against that now. But if you can find the right target, it might be possible to spoof an email address. So there's some crypto that protects it. So either the crypto could just not be turned on, or that particular crypto also, a lot of people use a very old version that's still vulnerable. It uses keys that are too short. So there was a story I read of someone that, so as you know, Google was founded by 2 people. And so he spoofed an email from one of the founders to the other founder just for fun, essentially. And they had that technical measure called DKIM in place, but the key that they were using was just too short. So he was able to brute force it. You can also use attachments with like a file name that's sensible. You know, like, so the dean sends me a PDF and it says like, you know, the attachment is like someone's CV or here's a grant application, can you look it over? And then like it's named like NSERC discovery grant.pdf or whatever, right? And so that might entice me to be more likely to click on it. Now you see at Concordia, maybe, I don't know, do you all have Concordia addresses as students? Anyways, you've probably seen this before if you have any sort of corporate email. But if you get external email, you'll get this like warning at the top that's like, oh, this email comes from outside of Concordia's domain. So that's meant to target spear phishing, where I might register an address that looks like it's like dean.concordia@gmail.com or something like that. And so, yeah. Anyways, there's a lot of different variants on this kind of thing. Another thing that's common in social engineering is customer service. This is popular, A, because you actually get a human on the phone. So you can tell them whatever story you want. There's a chance that they believe you. And B, customer service agents actually have a lot of power in a lot of situations. So there are things that they can do like that would compromise security. Like they could reset your password for you if they believe your story, or they could, you know, whatever it is. So as a result of abuse of customer services, a lot of companies have changed how they do customer service so that the agents actually have less power. So they can't do things just because they believe your story. And then there's all sorts of training that goes into it as well. But this was like really bad maybe 10, 20 years ago, where, yeah, customer service agents could do a lot of things for you. All right, so instead of an evaluation methodology, what I'll give you instead is a framework for thinking about social engineering. So social engineering generally has 3 components. You might skip one depending on what exactly you're doing, but the most complicated one would involve all 3. So the first is some sort of information gathering, usually about the victim. There's something called pretexting. Pretexting simply is lying about who you are. And then there's some goal to it. So you research a lot. Basically, you do a lot of research so you can get a good pretext. Then you come in with your good pretext, but then you want something, right? So you want to use the information you've gathered and your pretext to have some sort of influence over the human that's screening access. And usually what you're trying to do is you're trying to get them to do one of 2 things generally. You're either trying to persuade them to do something for you. So I want you to reset my password. Okay, so that would be persuasion. Or you're trying to get information from them. Okay, what is my current password? Okay, and so we call that elicitation. So persuasion is do something, and elicitation is to basically to learn something. And then sometimes there's a feedback loop, like the elicitation is part of your information gathering step, and then you go through it again, and there's all sorts of like complicated attacks. But most attacks have these four, if you want to count them as separate, these four components to them. Okay, let me show you a video first. Okay, so this video I'll show you is from a TV show. It's kind of cheesy, but it's the premise of the show is basically like people that go around and they con other people. It's like a reality TV show, and then they like it's kind of like Candid Camera or something like that. And then at the end they're like, "Surprise, we tricked you." And this particular scam that they do, the person the material I'll present to you on social engineering is based on a book. The book is on the website. You don't have to read it. It's called The Art of Human Hacking by Paul Hagney. And so he gives this example in the book because he consulted with the people that made this episode. And so this was, something he came up with.
What's your PIN number?
So as you're watching it, keep in mind information gathering about someone, pretext, lying about who you are, and then persuading someone, or elicitation, trying to get information from them.
Did you not see anyone?
All right, I'm also going to try and get the sound to play for everyone to hear, although this might be a challenge. Okay, I don't see a way. Most of these rooms have like a audio jack. I'm sure this computer has sound, but it's going to take a while to boot up. So let me try and play it from my laptop, and if it's not loud enough, I'll actually, during the break, I'll get it fired up on here, and we can watch it later. But let me I'll crank this as loud as it goes.
And losing the lot. Through your letterbox, we expose a popular crime happening on housing estates today.
That's not, can you hear that in the back or no? Yeah? Okay. All right, let me let it roll then.
To uncover the secrets behind the most popular scams being carried out by con artists in Britain today. hustlers are Alex, a confidence trickster, Jess, a sexy swindler, Paul, a scam artist. They've been travelling the UK to demonstrate to our hidden cameras exactly how the cons work. All the people in this show have been hustled for real, and after being given their money back, they agreed that the footage could be shown, so you can avoid being ripped off by the same scams.
We all know that feeling of shock and panic when something of value is stolen. In this con, the hustler uses that feeling to manipulate the mark into doing something they wouldn't ordinarily do.
Alex, Jess and Paul arrive at the service entrance of a large London shopping arcade. They make their way to the cafe area on the second floor, a suitable hunting ground for our team. They split up to take up their positions for today's scam, the Bag and Pin Snatch. Alex and Jess are pretending to be tourists whilst keeping an eye out for a suitable victim. They have chosen this woman, and it's her handbag that's the target. The bag is going to be snatched, but that's only half the plan. The stakes are much higher, as you will soon see. Alex and Jess wait for an opportunity to make their move, while Paul watches proceedings from the back of the cafe. This is their chance. The woman's friend leaves the table, and the mark is now alone and vulnerable.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I come too. But when will I see you? No? When I come back? Yeah, no. Hang on, we take one photo. Okay, one second. Excuse me. Can you take a photo? 1 second.
Alex and Jess distract the mark and maneuver her into turning her back on her handbag.
Like this.
There's Paul. He's going in for the steal.
I have to put it on here. 1 second. I think he's like this. Okay.
Thank you.
Instead of doing a runner, Paul takes a seat near the mark's table. Alex and Jess have their photo, but the mark turns back to realise her bag is gone. Out of sight of the mark, Alex has to get somewhere fast.
Yeah, go to the van.
The mark is distressed.
Okay.
Paul talks to her, but she doesn't suspect that her handbag is less than 2 meters away in Paul's briefcase. This is the big hit. The team are going to try and fool the mark into giving them her card pin as well as her personal details.
Excuse me, do you have anything valuable in it? Do you have like bank cards or anything? What bank are you with? I work for Barclays.
Me too?
Yeah, let's cancel your bank cards. Have a seat. Don't worry, have a seat.
Did you not see anyone come here?
No, there was somebody walking through, but hold on.
See someone here?
Hold on.
Alex wants to sound like he's in a call centre and not in the cab of a van, so he plays in a sound effects CD of office noise.
All right, look, that's the bank call centre there. Speak to them. Cancel your cards, okay?
Hello?
My bag's still being stolen, and I have all everything in my bag.
I'm very sorry to hear about that, but I can certainly assist you with this call.
Yeah, please.
Do you know your account number and sort code?
I think it's... yeah, my phone code is...
With the help of the sound effects, Alex has convinced the mark that he is a bank call centre operator, and she dutifully gives him her bank details.
Okay. Now I need your full name and your postcode, please.
It's Michelle, and it's...
She still has no idea it was Paul who took her handbag, and is hiding it in his case on the next table.
Okay. Now, I've got the card details here. It doesn't look like anyone's tried to use it, so it's a good job you called us straight away. Now, the last thing I need from you in order to cancel your card is your 4-digit PIN number. Now, I can't take this off you myself because we're not allowed to take PIN numbers, so I'm going to have to put you through to the automated service. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
Alex now plays back a message from Jess recorded earlier.
After the tone, please enter your 4-digit PIN number,
Pretext records the tones, which could easily be decoded later to reveal the PIN.
Your card has now been cancelled. Thank you for calling. Goodbye.
The mark is grateful to the Good Samaritan. But Paul's walking away with her handbag. Worse still, she thinks her account is now safe, whereas in reality, the real hustlers have done enough to completely empty her finances. It started as a distraction robbery. It developed into a card pin and identity theft. A potentially devastating combination for the victim. It's time to put her out of her misery and let her know how bad it could have been.
Thank you. Yes, still your bag.
I pretty much carry my whole life in my handbag anyway. My cards and, oh man, everything. So the person on the phone, that's just a whole scam. Everything's a scam. Then they're just gonna get all my details, then aren't they? And just, then they can do whatever they want. Oh, well, thank goodness it's only you this time. Oh, no. Sorry, I'm so shaky.
There's two very important elements that make this con work so well. First, when we get the mark to take a photo of myself and Jess, she's concentrating on us. She's not looking at her bag, and that gives Paul a perfect opportunity for a clean steal. Second, when she makes the phone call, everything is as it should be. There's office noises in the background, there's phones ringing, there is nothing to arouse her suspicion. And without thinking, in panic, she gives all her information straight to us.
Always try and keep your wits about you. And if something doesn't seem right, then ask questions. But what you must always remember is that the only person that knows your PIN number is you. The bank don't know it, and they shouldn't ask for it. So if they do, then you should be immediately suspicious.
We meet people who've lost their handbags every day, and the effect on them is devastating. They lose the phones, they lose their address books, house keys, car keys, cash, cards. All these things have got to be replaced, and they have to basically reorganise their life.
All right. Okay, so that's an example. It's a nice example because it's actually a fairly complicated attack that we can think through. If I had challenged you, so sometimes in past years, if I know that this lecture is coming up, I should have last week challenged you to think about, could you get someone could you get a bank card from someone and then get them to actually tell you their PIN, like voluntarily, no coercion or anything like that. And it's actually a pretty challenging thing to come up with. But as you've seen, the victim was willing to share their PIN, as well as they were able to capture the bag as well. So let's just think about it in terms of this kind of framework, and then I'll give you lots of details about all of these different steps. But let's start with information gathering. So information gathering is usually about your victim themselves. So what do you do? So this, I'll put this as the example. Okay, what did they do for information gathering? So did they gather information on their victim before targeting their victim? Okay. So in this attack, information gathering was rather minimal. So there was minimal. Okay. Could they just pick anyone? Okay, so what were some of the constraints? Okay, so they want someone alone that they can distract. If the other person had been sitting there, then there's a chance they would have seen them when she was taking the photo. The other person would have seen it. In order to capture the phone has to be out, like not in a pocket, like so in a bag or something like that. So there was some surveillance. Basically, the thought that went into is, where's a scenario where you would see lots of people like that? So they chose the mall, right? So that was part of the information gathering, was that the food court in a mall, would facilitate this type of thing. So a food court in a mall is a good setting. And then they looked for the right kind of victim, someone that was alone, phone in the bag, wallet in the bag, that kind of thing. Okay, the next part is the pretext. So pretext is lying about who you are. Was there a pretext in this attack?
Yeah.
Okay, what was the pretext? Okay. Okay. Okay, so there's actually multiple pretexts. There's actually 4 pretexts. So there's a guy who says he's the banker. He's not actually a banker, right? What else? Just shout it out. Whoever says it loudest wins. The tourists. Okay, so they pretended to be tourists, a couple, and asked for a photo. That was a pretext. Okay, the call center itself. And then if you want to think about it, the automated system was kind of a pretext too. You could separate it or keep it together. So you have the tourists. You have the bank employee. Did the bank employee look like a bank employee? Yes. Would you believe that could be a bank employee? And what about, what was it about him that made him look? Okay. So he looked the part in terms of clothes. So he had a suit, briefcase. He was confident, right? He sort of took control of the situation. He seemed to have knowledge of a bank. Like, he's like, you lost your card. Okay, you gotta, these are the people you need to talk to. And I know the number. He had, he knew facts that a banker would know, I guess. Now, maybe that's suspicious because most bankers maybe wouldn't know that information. Like, that may be too convenient of information. But he had knowledge of a banker. So the protocol for canceling the card, the number and things like that. Where did this knowledge come from? So that's actually the information gathering stage. So even though we didn't see it in the video, they would have had to be okay, banks, it's almost common knowledge, but bankers look a certain way. This is the protocol for canceling cards or something that's close to it. There's usually a call center. The call center has noise in the background. So that also comes into the information gathering stage. So it didn't show them reading books about bankers, trying to figure out how bankers look. But that could be part of information gathering as well. So let me add that up to here. So then there's the background for each pretext. Another thing he could have done, he didn't do it, but this is something that I've heard described too, is another thing that's very persuasive, even though it should not be, is a business card. Okay, a business card doesn't say anything. It's not like if I have a Microsoft business card, it doesn't mean I work at Microsoft. I can print it myself. Okay, but somehow pulling it out, it looks real. It's very persuasive, even though it shouldn't be. And in this case, he didn't know, the victim banked at Barclays. He didn't know that ahead of time. Okay, that was one variable right? So she said she banked somewhere else, and he would have been like, oh, I banked there. But he could actually have a business card for all the major banks, right? And then she says, I bank at Barclays. He reaches in and pulls out the Barclays one and hands it to her and says, oh, I'm an employee at Barclays or whatever, right? And so that could add also to the sort of the pretext as well. So I'll just list it as an add-on. So prefabricate business cards for each bank. Okay, so the third pretext is the call center employee. So to add to the realism, they had like sort of office noise playing in the background. They also kind of talked, they sounded kind of like a call center person, right? They were kind of bored, kind of like reading, almost like they were reading what they were saying off like something that had been written, or they had said it 100 times in their life and they were just sort of on autopilot. And then you have the automated system that wasn't actually. And so this, you know, had like the robotic voice. Now, they did say something interesting. So this is actually slightly dangerous, but they said dangerous for them as attackers. They said, oh, I can't take your PIN off of you, so you're going to have to put it in the automated service. So it's good because they're giving a reason why it has to go in the automated service. But what they're also doing is they're getting the person to think about security. All of a sudden, they're thinking, oh, PINs, yeah, they're secret, and they can't take it off me. Oh, I have to think about who I'm allowed to give it to and who I'm not allowed to give it to. So if you prompt someone to think about security, then they maybe start thinking critically, and then maybe they discover the scam. So that was sort of a dangerous prompt. I would have just said, like, okay, I'm going to hand you over to the automated system, but not said why. But anyways, it's a small thing. Okay, so information gathering. We have 4 pretexts. Let me, just so the numbering doesn't get messed up, I'll call this 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Okay, then the final step is influence. And so in this case, it's mainly elicitation. You want to get information, which is the banking PIN from the person. So they did a couple things that made it easier to elicit information, okay? The first thing is they created a stressful situation, right? So the victim, they're thinking like, oh, I just lost my money, I lost my bank cards, you know, maybe my phone, and like I'm gonna have to go reset it, and like, you know, I just went out for lunch and now it's like my whole day I have to spend like trying to undo this one thing that happened, right? So when you're stressed, you don't think critically as well, okay? So they had a stressful situation. Which could cause people to abandon critical thought. So it's not like you're sitting at home and you get some email and you're like calm and you're just like browsing your email and then you see it and then you're like, oh, should I give money? Should I go buy a gift card for the Dean of Engineering or not? You're thinking more critically because you're relaxed. But here it's like you're stressful. You want to fix the situation. You'll do anything to fix it as quick as you can. Someone's offering you an easy way to fix it, or at least it doesn't completely fix it because you want your card back. But at least you can fix an aspect of the problem, which is by canceling it. And so it's very easy to go down that path. Okay, so the let me phrase it like this. So there's the confidence, the bank employee. They offered a quick fix. And imagine if you didn't take that person up on his offer, right? It would almost be like socially, like he's an employee, he's working at the bank, and you'd be like, oh, don't worry about it. I'm going to go to the bank in person, or I'm going to go find a payphone and not use your phone or something like that. Like, it's almost like it's mildly offensive maybe, to say, oh, actually, I think you're a liar. I'm going to, go fix this myself, right? And so you can also create situations like that where the person basically has to say, you could be a liar, so I don't trust you, right? And so even though maybe she's thinking like she doesn't fully trust it, she maybe is polite and doesn't want to say it, so maybe she goes along with it. So that's another aspect. It might be easier to give your PIN to a computer than a person, because you're thinking maybe at worst, like now a computer knows my PIN, but it's not like a human knows it. I don't know, but maybe the fact that she was giving the PIN to a computer, that might have helped her. It might have helped elicit that information from her as opposed to a human. I'm not sure, but that could be. Okay. Skip this point. All right. So anyway, so you can see that this framework sort of works anyway. So you have information gathering, you have pretexts, and then you have some influence that you're able to exert. So now let's back out and we'll think about each of these in detail themselves. So as opposed to the simple example. And then I'll tell you some more stories about social engineering attacks. Okay, so the framework in depth is, let me just repeat it. So we have info gathering, pretexting, and then influence, Okay, so why are we studying social engineering? As I mentioned before, it's a prevalent form of attack. We see lots of attacks that maybe don't do 100% social engineering, but social engineering some aspect of it. It's a foot in the door, and then once you get malware on one computer, then it turns into a technical attack of how you can infiltrate a network based on that. I want to give you the intuition for how it works so you can think about defending. Because it's hard to defend against. And I might say it's hard to even know how to. So it's hard to defend against, but it's hard to even know how to defend against it. Like you know, what's the procedure for, you know, how could this person have prevented it, right? It's easy to say in this exact scenario, but like how in general could you make sure that you're not a victim to like social engineering frauds? Another simple reason is that now you can get a job being a social engineer if you want. So it's sort of a more obscure job, but you can do like sort of penetration testing as a social engineer. And then the other thing I must caution you is that most social engineering is illegal. And if it's not illegal, it could be at least unethical. So if you, for example, became a social engineer, like that was your job, just like any kind of pen testing, but this one's a little worse. Like say a company hires you to try and figure out if they're vulnerable to social engineering. And then you go in and yeah, you're able to penetrate the system. And there was a certain employee, right, that fell victim to your attacks, and then they get fired as a result of you doing your job, right? So that's where there's an ethical consideration. It's not illegal. The company consented to you doing this, but you have to think through the ethics of what exactly you're doing. So maybe you tell them what the vulnerability is without pointing out individual people or things like that. And so a lot of the background of social engineering is thinking through the ethics of the situation as well, and what the limits are and what the boundaries are in terms of what you can do and things like that. Okay, so information gathering. And in some cases it's strictly illegal. Like if you pretend to be a police officer, that's a crime, straight up. Like, yeah, period. Okay, so information gathering, you're usually learning about the company that you're targeting, or I'll always try and frame it in terms of a company, but it could be a person or something. So you have a target in mind, and you're learning all you can about them. And also, if you're going to use a pretext, you have to learn all about your pretext so that you're convincing with your pretext. So those are the two main aspects of information gathering. So learn about the target. So the target might be a company or a person or something else. And then learn about your pretext. So if I'm going to tend to be an IT person, what does an IT person look like? How do they dress? If I'm asked to do a simple task, could I actually do it? They're like, oh yeah, before you go in there, my computer's not working. Could I actually fix that first, and then go into the room? And not just look like a generic IT person, but maybe I know the exact company that so there's a company and they're outsourcing their IT to some other company. Do I know what their exact company, like what their name is, what their uniforms look like? Can I show up with like the badge of that company name on my uniform? Could I know that the normal IT person that would answer is away on vacation, so it's not unusual that someone different would come in, right? Like if I know they're on vacation, then I know that if I show up, I'll just be like, oh yeah, like I know, so-and-so usually comes in, but they're on vacation, and they probably told the person about the vacation too, and then that adds to the realness of the pretext. And it also explains why it's like a totally new person in case they recognize the people. Okay, so there's all sorts of things like that. So you can learn a lot from things like social media, web searches in general. So if you want to learn about corporate structure, things like LinkedIn are really good. So you can know names of employees. You'd be like, oh, I work there, like, so-and-so, and then have like real names of employees, or like I'm on this person's team or whatever. You can know the organization chart, like who's boss and that kind of thing. So a lot of this you can read just by seeing all the people that have profiles for a particular company and what their titles are and things like that. You can use social networking to learn more personal things, like if someone's on vacation or what they're interested in, that type of thing. There's automated tools. So there's one called Multigo. So this is an automated tool where you can basically start with a particular, say, a profile of someone, and then it can find like other profiles and then pull the information in and pull the friends in, and people write different like queries that you can do. So it would automate the scraping of lots of web data to learn about people or companies. You can also, this is sort of more obscure, but there's tools for what's called password profiling. And so password profiling would be, I scrape your social media, and so if I want to brute force your password, instead of just trying random words out of the dictionary, I'll pull things like I see, oh, you like Newcastle United, and so maybe I pull out like the player names and the team name and things like that, and I weigh them more heavily when I'm trying to guess passwords, or I look at your website and you're interested in blockchain, and so maybe I'm pulling stuff in about that, or whatever the case may be. So these are automated tools. Vacation plans are like one of the key pieces of information. Vacations are so important because every company has a certain chain of command, right? Like there's certain people that do certain jobs, but when someone goes on vacation, then there's someone new that's doing that job, okay? And so the chain of command changes temporarily because of vacations. Okay, and so you can leverage this in different ways. So like in the IT example, the example was, I'm going to wait for the person that I'm sort of pretexting to be, I'm going to wait for them to go on vacation, and then as the pretexter, I'm going to take their place, right? The other way you can do it is think of the target. So there's a target person, and you wait for the real person to go on vacation. Then what happens? Someone else has to sit there and do that job, okay? So the person that's normally, the security guard that's normally outside of the server room or whatever, they're on vacation, there's someone new that's sitting there, okay? They maybe don't know the protocols because it's not their day-to-day job, right? They're just filling in, they do it, for 2 weeks every year, right? So they don't know inside and out. They don't know that, oh, you should never do this. They don't know the people that normally show up. So someone shows up, and someone shows up, you don't know them because you're just filling in on the job, and they're like, oh, hey, where's like so and so, and you're like, oh, they're on vacation, and it's like, okay, this person knows the real person that should be here, and or maybe the person says, oh yeah, I know so and so is on vacation, you must be like so and so or whatever, and so you're like, okay, like I don't know who they are because this isn't my normal job, but they seem to know me and the situation here, and so it's more believable. It adds credibility to the pretext, and then so it can be a window in. So they don't necessarily know the protocols as well. They maybe didn't have training on social engineering. They don't know the people as well. Now, sometimes it can backfire because sometimes the replacement person, because it's not their normal job, they really want to follow the rules closely. Okay, they don't want to screw it up, and so they're actually extra cautious, right? Because it's not their normal job. And so they might be like, oh, like just wait till the other person comes back. Like what you're asking me is kind of weird. So the other person will be back next week. So like just wait next week. So sometimes it makes it worse, but sometimes it makes it better. So it depends on the circumstance. So it might make it better for you as the attacker, or it might make it worse, depending. Another thing that's sort of similar to vacations are disruptions. So things like construction, for example. Okay, so let's say that the building there's construction being done on the facade of the building. Now there's doors that are normally locked, and they're just, you can't go through those doors anymore, and so there's some door on the side, and it's just being held open, so anyone can walk in, right? Like there's a different route that you have to take, or things like that. So there might be doors that are open. Emergencies, like say someone pulls the fire alarm, then all of a sudden there's a lot of chaos, people aren't watching closely, there might be people coming out of doors and other people going in and things like that. So there could be some disruption to the normal functioning of, in particular, the movement of people. Maybe they open doors up for fire people that have to go into the building, and then your pretext could be, that you're a fire person, or maybe you can go in because the doors are open, or things like that. I'm just going to add to social engineering employee interests. I had it as a separate point, but it fits under this. Another form of information gathering is called dumpster diving. And so once again, this is something that was, 15 years ago, like it could yield a lot of information, but now companies are way more careful about it because there were some high profile cases of it. But basically what you do is you just go through the garbage of companies. So there's a lot of paper that gets thrown out, and if you start reading the paper, there's lots of information on the paper. It could be messages, it could be about business strategy, it could be about people. You learn who the employees are and what their positions are and things like that. Maybe username passwords, like maybe they print them out and give them to someone like when they're new. right? So now most companies, so this isn't so fruitful anymore, but most companies use secure shredding services. But maybe your pretext is that you work at the shredding company. So you show up and you're like, where's the documents? I'm here to collect them so I can go shred them. And then you get all the documents and then you read them instead of shredding them. Okay, so that's information gathering. Any questions or comments on information gathering? Okay, so the next thing we'll look at is pretexting, but it's 7 o'clock, so why don't we take a break, and we'll talk about it after the break at 10 after 7. Okay, so the next component we saw is pretexting. So this is impersonating someone that you're not. Pretexting isn't an end goal. Like if someone believes that, oh, you actually are IT staff, that doesn't achieve your purpose. You want to get into the server room or something like that. So what pretexting does is it sort of gets you in the vicinity of your target. Then you still have to do persuasion or elicitation in order to actually get what you want. But the pretext sort of gets you in the right position. And so there's some examples that I pulled out of a textbook, and I didn't write down where I got it. So I'm going to, the author deserves credit for this, so I'll try and fill this information in later. But you can see lots of different things. So we talked about internal IT support. This could be the situation you're looking to test a new system, tourist, some sort of, fire warden, you're doing an inspection. You need to check that the server room, all the fire alarms are working and that type of thing. Customer support, pest control, right? So you're looking for things, delivery people, remote worker, whatever, journalist. So there's lots of different ideas there in terms of pretexts that you might take. So in terms of maintaining a pretext, first you really need to become an expert, or as much as you can, of whatever it is that you are pretexting. Because you never know what actions or questions that you might be asked. Like if people assume if they're buying your pretext, then they'll ask you anything about your pretext, right? So if you're saying you're pest control, they'll be like, at home I have this problem, and you need to know how to answer those questions. Confidence is key as well. One thing the social engineer might think about doing is to script out possible conversations. So a real conversation will never go exactly as planned, but it usually will circle back to certain kinds of topics. But you don't want to memorize exactly what you're going to say, or it will sound like sort of robotic and planned, and then that could be a particular hint that things aren't right. So the person that the victim, it's not always that they're going to become conscious all of a sudden that, oh, you're lying to them, right? But there's little things that just, at a subconscious level, they're just maybe not quite buying what they're seeing. And they maybe can't put their finger on exactly why it is, okay? But there's a lot of subtleties to like the human subconscious that could cause things to trip. So if you don't sound the right way, or you don't look the right way, or you say the wrong thing, or whatever it is, you don't know what those little indicators are. Another thing is that if you're lying, it takes a lot of brain power. So people that are lying are thinking about their lying and what they're saying, and what they would say if the other person said this or whatever. So they're using a lot of brain power, and so it can make it harder to be natural and to be confident. It can make it harder to remember the things that you're being told. So you're being told something, but you're so concentrated on maintaining your pretext that you forget what you're told. So you might like record the conversation. Well, first off, it depends on the pretext. So a pretext that's easy to fake or is close to your actual experience and things like that are going to be easier. You know, if my pretext was I'm a medical doctor, that would be like really, really hard for me to do. But in IT staff, that might be a little bit easier. So, you know, you could choose a pretext that that is easier for whatever reason. Maybe people ask less questions. Maybe it's because you already have some expertise in the area. You can record everything so that you don't forget things. And small details are important because, yeah, people's subconscious will like jeopardize your pretext and you won't necessarily know why. So the more small details that you can pay attention to, the better. So how are you dressed? Is there an expectation around how you're dressed? Are you carrying some equipment or something like that, or a briefcase or something like that? How do you talk? So it could be, do you use jargon? Like jargon is like technical terms, like things that people don't know. Like if I'm like, oh, SSH, TLS or whatever, like people won't know that. It could be regional. So do you have the right accent, for example? Etc. Okay, influence. So before we split it into persuasion and elicitation, I'll just, two general things. It's important for the social engineer to have a specific goal. So what exactly is it that you want to achieve? There's some pre-planning that goes into how you're going to achieve it. You've thought about what the contingencies are. So if you're not going to get what you want, do you know why? Like the person might say no for these 3 reasons. Okay, and if for reason 1 I would do this, for reason 2 I would do this, and reason 3 I would do this. And then you also have an exit plan. So like whether you're successful or not, you have to get out of there at some point, right? Maybe they're becoming suspicious. How are you going to leave quickly? You get what you want. How do you leave in a way that doesn't leave suspicion? So they're thinking like it's too late. They gave you the information, but there's a difference between they gave it to you and then as you're walking out, they're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I better call like the boss and tell them or whatever. And like they just leave and they don't even think a second thought about what they told you. And then the other thing which we mentioned already is you can exploit disruption. So people on vacation plan, people on vacation. Construction, that kind of stuff. Okay, so if we want to think about elicitation, it's more or less the same whether you're trying to elicit information or persuade, but there's a few tricks that are more specific, I think, to elicitation than persuasion. Right, so elicitation, your goal is to get information that shouldn't be disclosed. Okay, so whether you're persuading or eliciting information, it's important to, what we say, build a rapport. So a rapport is sort of like the person likes you. You have something in common. You're talking about things. There's some sort of relationship there. It's not just like a stranger talking to a stranger. So you could try and get the target to like you. Whatever, get them to laugh at you. Express mutual interests. Oh, my favorite soccer team is whatever. And you can exploit the information gathering to know what they are interested in, so you can pick the right things. You can appeal to their ego, flatter them, etc. Another thing, if you want information, is sort of reverse psychology, I guess, is you could actually say the wrong information to them. So you could say, oh, blah, 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 and they'd be like, and it's just human nature that you want to correct someone, right? If someone tells you something and it's wrong, you just want to be like, no, that's like not right. The actual thing is this, right? The sales number for last year is blah, blah, blah. And they'll be like, no, it's not. It's this. And then they just told you the information that you wanted. So you could actually purposely misstate something so that you get corrected. So you learn the real fact. Another thing is, the more you know about the kinds of stuff, like say there's some sensitive information about the company that you're discussing, if you also know sensitive information and you're telling them stuff, then they might be more likely to reciprocate, or they might think, oh, you know about that stuff, so therefore it's safe to tell you about this other stuff, that type of thing. So if you have this sort of shared knowledge or knowledge about proprietary information, then that helps as well. Another thing that comes from cognitive persuasive psychology is there's this idea of preloading. So the idea of preloading is you just get someone thinking about something, usually by mentioning it early in passing. Sort of like, actually, I had the criticism I had of the video that we saw was actually related to preloading. So because they said, I can't take your PIN from you because I'm a human, you have to use the automated service, they preloaded the idea of security. So now the person is thinking about their PIN, they're thinking about the security of their PIN, and so they're preloaded with that notion. So that's an example of sort of what you don't want to do. But you can also preload people to think about certain things. And so maybe this comes up more in persuasion or something like that. But like if you want someone to do something, then you can sort of suggest it early, not in a direct way. But anyways, it sort of gets them thinking about it. So for example, let's say ultimately you want to trick someone with a malicious attachment. Okay? So you're going to send them an email, and I don't know, maybe they're tickets to like a concert or something like that, right? Then if you're able to have a conversation beforehand, or someone else that's working with you, you could preload the person to think about that band and how much they like them, or about music in general, or things like that, so that when the tickets come in, they're extra excited. It was sort of in the back of their minds anyway. Maybe you could even mention, oh, like so-and-so has a concert coming up. And then all of a sudden, like later they get an email with like supposed tickets for that concert, but it's a malicious PDF that has malware or something like that. So that would be an example of preloading. And then in terms of persuasion, so persuasion is to get the target not to tell you something, but to do something. And you wouldn't get that person to do something unless if they were authorized to do it. So it's generally something that they're authorized to do. You're not. You can't just do it yourself because you're not authorized. And so that's why you're targeting them. So once again, you can, sort of build rapport. You can try and use empathy. Like you have some story about like, I don't know, like you show up for a job interview, you're purposely late, and then you have some big story about everything that went wrong, and then you're asking, like, I did not have time to print my CV off. I have it on a thumb drive. Can you just print it for me? Right, and the person feels sorry for you, so they put the thumb drive in the computer, and then that's the attack vector that you want. You can create indebtedness as well. This is hard to do, but possible. So you walk into an office and you're like, oh, I saw your boss, and they're coming up the stairs and they're really angry about something, and you see the person's on Facebook or something like that. Like, you better close that window, like your boss is coming and they're really angry, and then they come storming past. And then now they feel like, oh, you did a favor for me, maybe I'll do a favor for you, that kind of thing. Another trick you can do is ask for a lot. So you can ask for a big thing and then concede to a small thing. So you can go in and ask for something, and they'll say no, and then you say, well, can you at least do this small piece of it? But that small piece is actually what you wanted all along. So they want to do something for you, and so you sort of, it's like a negotiation. You're like, I want this, but you open high, you ask for a lot, and then they're like, no, and then, but I'll do this for you, and then you sort of go back and forth, and you get that middle point where there's actually what you wanted. The final thing, and this is where a professional social engineer that's doing it as a job would cross ethical boundaries. So they'd have to think about whether they would be willing to do this. But real attackers will do it, is to use emotional manipulation. So try and make you afraid or angry, use coercion, anxiety, whatever the case is. And so this could persuade you to do something. It could also just stop you from thinking rationally, and therefore you might be more likely to do something. So real attackers do this, so you have to defend against it. Usually ethical social engineers won't. Ethical hackers won't do this. The video actually is an example of sort of anxiety anyways. So the person they were in a stressful environment, as we pointed out, that was created. And so that might have made them more susceptible to go along with the attack than they would have been if they were calm and collected and thinking more rationally. Okay, so let me illustrate these again. So we saw it in the example of the video, but let me tell you a couple more stories just to hammer home the framework. So the next story I'll tell you is about RSA. All right, so RSA is both a crypto algorithm that you might have heard of. It does signatures and it does public key encryption. And there's also a company that was founded. And they're a very large security company. So initially, I guess cryptography was sort of their flagship product, but now they do just sort of general security. We talked about RSA earlier because they have one kind of flagship product that a lot of people that have worked in industry are familiar with, which is called the RSA token. And so the idea of the RSA token is it's something that's going to help you log in. It's like a two-factor authentication device. And it takes the form, there's different formats for it, but traditionally it would be something that you would stick on your key ring. So you would have like this like little device that was on your keys, and it had a screen on it. And either you push a button to advance it, or it was just set on a timer. But at any particular time, there would be like some code that would appear on it. And so you would look at the device and you'd be like, okay, it's saying 17437. So what you would do is you would log in to your server as normal. You would still have a username and password. And then you would also have this code, whatever the code is that's on your device at a particular time. Now, the company gave you this thing originally. So everyone's token is different. So this is unique to this person. So it would have like some sort of serial number. And there would be a database somewhere that says, you know, this physical token was given to Alice. Okay, so they know which token you have, but they don't know the number that's appearing on it, or someone knows, but anyways, we'll talk about that. Okay, so you put your username, password in, and you put your second factor in. The server, like say it's Concordia, they can check your username, password. Okay, so they're going to validate whether this is correct or not. Okay, and then RSA, well, you can run it yourself on your own server, or most people would just use RSA. The company, they would have a server, and you would basically send, if this checked out the username and password's right, then you would basically send the code to RSA. So you'd say, okay, Alice is trying to log in, and she's saying that her RSA token says 7437. Okay. Then what RSA does is they have basically a database that says, okay, we know who Alice is. We gave her this particular token number, or this particular token, like this. We gave them the 5th token that we manufactured or whatever. And the way the numbers come is there's what's called a pseudo-random number generator. So it sounds fancy, but it's a pretty simple concept. It's showing you a random number, okay? But the random number is not truly random. It's not like the token is throwing dice and it comes up with 7437. What it's doing is it's iterating through a sequence of numbers, okay? And there's some secret called the seed. And there's a mathematical algorithm that you start with the seed and then you say, what's the first number? And then it gives you a number. And then you say, okay, give me a second random looking number. So it's called pseudo-random. You can't tell that it's not random. It looks as close to random as possible. And so you say, give me a second random number, and then it gives you a random number. Give me the third one. But if 2 people have the same seed, then they'll go through the exact same sequence of random looking numbers. Okay, so what RSA is doing is they're storing the seed, and they know that like it's been 5 years since they manufactured this device, so they know where that number should be. Okay, maybe it updates every 10 minutes, so they might be off by 1 or 2 numbers, but they'll search nearby in terms of time, and then every time someone logs in successfully, they'll kind of resynchronize their clock. So anyways, they know roughly what that number is that should be shown on Alice's RSA token at that particular time. Okay. So they go up, they look up Alice's information from here. They pull out the seed, and then using the seed, they advance it to the current time. And then they'll get a number. And so, for example, they might get the same number, and then they'll check whether that matches the number that they were given. So does this number match the number that was sent across the wire? And if they match, then they're happy. Okay? Yes?
This number, the hardware
Yeah.
this number?
Yeah, so the hardware is programmed with the seed. So the seed goes, RSA keeps the seed in a computer, and they put the seed on the token, and they put the algorithm for advancing the seed as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay. Now, the point here is that, let's say you lose your password, okay? So I know your username password. I can log in, but then it's going to ask me, well, what's your current RSA number? So I don't know it unless if I have your token, right? Or in a far-fetched scenario, if I hacked RSA's server and got the seeds for your token, then I could also figure out what your number is, okay? So those are basically the two options for breaking the second factor. Okay, so this story is of an attacker who actually did the second thing. They were able to breach RSA server. They were able to get all the seeds for basically every RSA token that was managed by RSA, as opposed to the companies managing it themselves. Lots of governments, military, as well as corporations use these tokens. And so this was like a huge breach. It wasn't absolutely critical because there were still passwords protecting these accounts. So it's not like the attacker could immediately log in. But basically what they were able to do is reduce the security protecting accounts from 2-factor authentication to 1-factor, just to a password. And RSA, as a big flagship security company, it was obviously very embarrassing for them. It was expensive. They had to go and they had to replace basically everyone's token. They had to recall them and issue new tokens to them. So it was a huge kind of issue. So it was embarrassing. You had to recall the tokens, and it also reduced the security. To 1-factor authentication. For high-profile clients. So you have to be pretty concerned about your data security to even issue RSA tokens to all of your employees. So people who had the need for security, they're the types of people that would be using these RSA tokens. So like government, military, that type of thing. Okay, so how did this attack work? So we don't know the full details of the attack, but they actually published a blog post. And what was interesting to me is the attack at least started with a phishing attack. So it was actually a social engineering attack that at least got the attacker on the network of the RSA computers. And then from there, it became a technical attack where they were able to infiltrate it. And not to take anything away from that, because it would be really hard to move from a random employee's computer to the actual database that has all these seeds. So I don't know those details, but the thing that started it, anyways, was a social engineering attack. So basically, the adversary emailed a small number of people who all worked in HR at RSA. Okay, so it wasn't like a random spam email to like millions of people. It was spear phishing because they knew who would be like a set of 4 or 5 people that would normally be copied in on an email together. So these are yeah, I'll say that they're real people. And because they all work together, they would naturally be included in an email. The address was spoofed. So the from address to match a real RSA employee. And there was an attachment. The attachment was called 2011. That's when the attack happened. Recruitment plan. .xsl. What's XSL? Excel, yeah. So this is a spreadsheet. Presumably, I'm going to make up some of the details, but presumably RSA used Excel. It was common. And emailing spreadsheets around is also very common. The other thing about Excel is it's actually very powerful. So you might think of it as, oh, it's just data. Like it's read-only, like it can't execute things. But Excel like gives you a scripting language like Visual Studio or VS Basic or whatever, and you can program actually pretty complicated scripts and things into Excel. So it's a much more powerful. It's not like well, even PDFs can be pretty powerful as well, but it's not like a MP3 file where you just sort of consume it and then that's all it does. It doesn't like run programs and things like that. Okay, so it had an embedded Flash script. Does anyone remember Flash? So this is a programming language or scripting language, but the point is that it can execute. Normally, Excel would sandbox this, so you can do little flash things, whatever, in your spreadsheet, but it's not like it's going to take over your computer. But the attacker, and this points to them being sophisticated, they're not just random attackers, is they had a 0-day exploit. So something that nobody knew was a problem in Excel. Or rather, like in the flash within. In Flash in Excel. And so they were able to load malware onto the computer of anyone that opened this attachment. I don't know exactly, but sometimes even email clients, like they don't do it anymore. But like if you're using Microsoft Outlook, for example, and you send an Excel sheet, it might even open it up kind of for you, just so it's like really quick. Like it will kind of pre-queue it up because they expect that you might look at it, or they might show you a preview or something like that. And so it might be that the person didn't even have a choice. Their client just sort of opened it enough in order for the exploit to take place, or it could be that they double clicked. But put yourselves in the shoes. I mean, you're getting an email, it's from someone else, like literally from someone else in your company. Other people are CC'd in. You could expect like recruitment plans. It's the kind of thing that HR people might send to each other. And so that's going to be really hard not to click. You basically have a rule that would say never click on any attachment ever in an email. That kind of rule could catch this and prevent it from happening, but anything short of that will not catch this. Okay, so apparently RSA did have that kind of rule where they weren't supposed to email things around, but you never know. Like company culture, it's easy, it's convenient, and so people don't always follow the rules strictly. I'm sure they do now. So anyway, so that's how it all started. Then we don't know the details. So RSA actually disclosed this. They put up a blog post about like kind of how this piece of the attack happened, and then they took it down. And so I think, I can't remember on the course website if the link still works, or it might be a cached version from Wayback Machine or something else. But anyways, they didn't really say what happened next, but somehow the attacker was able to move laterally through the network. To the server or servers that held the seeds. And so they were able to breach it. And the second part of the attack, or the third part, so first part, I guess, social engineering, you get some malware on the machine. Second, you do some sort of technical attack to move around. So now you have your malware sitting on the machine that has all the seeds. So you sort of know all the seeds, but your malware and the data is still on RSA's server. Okay? You want to learn it, you have to get it back out. Okay? So this is something also that maybe you don't think about so much. But it's not like you can't just have your malware email it to you or something like that, because that's going to look suspicious on the network. Or you can't just open up a connection back to a server that you control and then just start throwing all this data out, okay? So you have to exfiltrate it from the network in a way that's not going to trip up all the intrusion detection and whatever other systems that RSA, the company, have. And so there was some sophistication there as well. Now, because they were caught, I assume that they didn't do this right. I assume that this is where, I mean, obviously it wasn't somewhere sooner, otherwise they would have stopped the attack. So I assume that the only reason that RSA knows that this happened is because they saw them exfiltrate the data. And maybe it was too late to like like they got some of the data out, and so it was too late to stop it. It could also be that maybe they went out on the dark market and they saw the person trying to sell it, or they saw unusual login activity and then somehow worked out what happened. So I don't know exactly how they came to know that this attack occurred, but my money would be on that they saw them trying to exfiltrate it, and so they found it. But anyways, we don't know the details of this. Okay, so the lesson here is if it can happen to RSA, one of the largest security firms in the world, then it can happen to almost any company, especially at this time in 2011. Yeah. Okay, here's another story. This one happened closer to home. Okay, so this has to do with Bitcoin, although the details don't really have much to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin, as you know, is this digital currency, cryptocurrency, and it's worth a certain amount of Canadian dollars. I don't know what the current price is today. But how do you get that price? How do you know how much Bitcoin is worth? It's because people actively trade it. Okay, so people are trading Canadian dollars for Bitcoin, and people with Bitcoin are trading it for Canadian dollars basically in real time. And so where do they trade? How do you trade Bitcoin for Canadian dollars? And so there's a couple different ways. You could go to like an ATM. There's a couple like within a block of Concordia, but they have super high fees. So like I personally wouldn't recommend them. But anyways, that's one way of doing it. But the most common way is to use an exchange service, which is an online website. So it's set up kind of like a stock exchange. People put in what they're willing to sell their Bitcoin at, and people say what they're willing to pay in Canadian dollars for Bitcoin. And then if you see something that you like, then you can execute a trade against it. So this is called an exchange service. Okay, so if you're buying Bitcoin with Canadian dollars, you're buying it from someone else who's selling the Bitcoin for Canadian dollars. Okay, and you're never meeting them. You're never talking directly with them. What happens in an exchange service is I load my Bitcoin into the website, and they move their Canadian dollars to the bank account of the website, and then the website executes the trade. So they just update their ledger saying, okay, this Bitcoin now belongs to you, and this Canadian dollar belongs to you, and then you withdraw it. So you say, okay, I have this much Bitcoin, and so now I want it back. And then they'll send it back to whatever address you control. Or I have this much Canadian dollars, and then they'll send it, here's my banking information, and then they'll send it to you, okay? So exchange services, the way that they work is they're always sitting on a big pile of Canadian dollars, and they're sitting on a big pile of Bitcoin because everyone who's trading on the platform, they have to give it to the exchange service so the exchange service can actually do the executions, okay? So exchange service basically matches a buyer who has Canadian dollars with the seller who, for example, wants Bitcoin. Okay, and so they both put in their prices, and then they see that they're willing to do the trade, and then the exchange swaps it, and then they withdraw their money. Okay, so an exchange service, so they're sitting on large amounts of CAD. So this would be held in a bank account, probably. And they're sitting on large amounts of Bitcoin. And where does the Bitcoin sit? So you can't park Bitcoin at a bank yet in Canada. There's no banks that want to give you a Bitcoin account. And so it sits on a server, okay, that's under the control of the exchange. Now, Bitcoin's this weird thing where there's no actual Bitcoins And so it's not like the money sitting there, but there's keys that could sign that money over to someone else. So that's technically what's sitting there is these signing keys that you could use to transfer that Bitcoin to someone else, as opposed to the actual Bitcoin itself. But that detail doesn't matter. The point is that if you were able to breach this server, then you could steal all the Bitcoin that was on it. Okay, this happened lots of times. So the first big Bitcoin exchange was called Mt. Gox. It got hacked early in Bitcoin's history and lost $450 million worth of Bitcoin. So almost $500 million. And then since then, almost every major exchange service has been breached one time or another. And so this is the story of a much smaller scale attack. But I tell it because A, it has to do with social engineering, and B, it happens close to here, not in Montreal, but it happened in Ottawa, which is not that far away. So generally what they'll do is, this is also another detail that doesn't matter so much, but because people are coming at all times and saying, I want my Bitcoin back out, they have to have the Bitcoin like at their fingertips in order to release. But at the same time, if it's just like a bank, like everyone in the room puts their money in a bank, but we don't all go to the bank and ask for our money out at the exact same time, okay? So the bank is usually sitting on 90% of our money, and then there's 10% that's sort of going in and out of the bank. Okay, so Bitcoin exchanges are sort of like that, where not everyone asks for their Bitcoin at once. And so what they do is they maintain what's called a hot wallet, which has some fraction, say 5% of their Bitcoin, and it's sitting on a server. And then they have a cold wallet that has 95% of their savings or the holdings, and it's sitting like in a safe, like it's on a USB key in a safe or something like that. It's not on an internet connected server. So if you're able to breach an exchange service server, you get their hot wallet, which is usually a fraction of the total amount of Bitcoin they have. And every now and then they have to replenish the hot wallet. So enough people ask for their money out, there's no money left in the hot wallet. So then they go to the safe and they bring the USB stick over, and then they transfer another 5%, and then they put it back in the server or whatever. Okay. So anyways, there is Bitcoin. It's sitting on the server, but it's usually a small fraction of the total holdings. It's called a hot wallet. Okay, so in this particular case, there was an exchange. It was based in Ottawa. And the exchange didn't maintain their own servers. What they did instead is they paid a company to maintain their services for them, their servers for them. So that's common, okay? In this case, it's a very reputable company. So it's called Granite Networks, which you might not have heard of. I hadn't heard of it before. But if you look it up, you see that it's owned by Rogers, who you've probably heard of. They're a big telecom in Canada. And so they have a data center, and you can rent server space, racks, that kind of stuff from them. Okay, so the hot wallet in this case had, it's not like the Mt. Gox where it was $500 million, it was $100,000, but it's still substantial. So it had 100K in Bitcoin in the hot wallet. On the server that was sitting in Rogers' data center. Okay, so what someone did is they went to Granite Networks and they saw that they had customer support. Okay, so they went to customer support for Granite Networks. And in this case, they didn't actually even talk to the person. They just talked through web chat. So they had like one of those like chat boxes. And so they ended up talking with someone there. The adversary pretended to be the exchange. Okay, the exchange was small. There's maybe only a couple people that ran it. And so they pretended to be the exchange itself. So that was their pretext. And basically they said, okay, we're having trouble with our servers. We need you to help us out with it. Okay, so they asked for access. Now, the only information that they never were asked to identify themselves or prove that they were from the Exchange service. It seemed that just the fact that they knew that there was a client with this name that had a server at this particular place seemed to be enough for them to believe it. So they had minimal information was disclosed. About who they were. Seems sufficient that they in this case the attacker, I'll be more explicit, that the adversary just knew the company name basically. Okay, so once they got someone on the hook, then they said, okay, can you go and do a bunch of stuff? And there's just a newspaper article about it, so I don't know exactly what happened, but reading between the lines of it, it seems that there was reference to they plugged a laptop into the server. They rebooted it into safe mode. So safe mode is like a troubleshooting mode, but it turns off all sorts of security features. And what else? I don't know what else happened. But the end of the story was whatever they did, it was sufficient for the people to steal all the Bitcoin from the hot wallet. Okay, so that was, yeah, basically just using a web chat, pretending you're a company, not having to authenticate yourself, no username, passwords, or anything like that. And you were able to just through persuasion, knowing what you're asking for, knowing that what you're asking for is the kind of thing that maybe someone would ask for if they were having trouble with their servers. And that whole pretext wrapped up, that was enough in this case to persuade whoever the IT people were at the data center to help them out and steal all the money. Okay, the next example, I actually have slides for I talked about it once, so I'll just show you the slides because it will save me the time of writing it all out. All right, so this is Matt Honan. He's as you might have saw in the speaker notes, he's a journalist. He writes usually tech stuff, and he wrote about this for a cover for Wired magazine several years ago now. He also is on Twitter, or was, and he has a really short Twitter name. Okay, his Twitter name is only 3 characters at MAT. And people like short Twitter names. Especially in the old days of Twitter where you were limited to 140 characters and that included the username. So if you're trying to talk or tag someone that had a long username, you were eating up your 140 characters. He also probably had like interesting people that followed him and things like that. So for whatever reason, someone wanted that Twitter handle for their own, and so they were determined to get it from using social engineering. Okay, so they wanted the Twitter handle. So what they did is they did the first thing that you might do is they went to Twitter and said, "Hi, I'm Matt Honan. I forgot my password. Can you help me reset the password for @Matt?" Okay, and so Twitter said, "Fine, we have a password reset system. All we need is to basically for you to click a link that we're going to send to your registered email account." And the registered email account was with Gmail. Okay. Now the adversary doesn't control the Gmail account, so they're not able to click on the link, and so they're not able to reset the Twitter password. Okay. So end of story, right? Okay. So what would you do next? All right, so you do the exact same thing with Google, right? So you go over to Gmail and you're like, I'm this address at gmail.com. I forgot my password. Can you reset it for me? Okay. And so Google kind of has the same policy, and they're like, well, we see that you actually have another email address that you've set up as your recovery email address. And so we'll send an email to this recovery address, and that's fine, no problem. We can reset your password. Now this recovery is at, the address was at me.com. Does anyone know what at me.com is? Okay, so it was Apple at one time decided they wanted to be Facebook. And so they tried to do like a social networking. They had this whole platform, me.com. It died. And so anyways, I'm sure you can still, people who still have me addresses just redirect to at iCloud.com or whatever. But anyways, it was Apple's attempt at it. Okay, now the adversary in this case, okay, they don't have the access to the Apple account either. Okay, so they're going around in circles. And so now they're going to go to Apple, and what are they going to do? They're going to do the same thing. I forgot my password. Okay. Now, there's one difference, at least at that time, between Apple, Google, and Twitter. So Google and Twitter were companies that generally didn't they didn't do financial transactions with their customers. That's changed now. I think Twitter has like a pro service, and Google you can buy like web space and things like that. So they started to do financial transaction. But at that time, they basically had no customer support. Okay, these are two companies. They wanted to pay like the absolute minimum for customer support. Really notoriously hard to like get. You can't just call up Google and talk to them. At least at this time, it's probably different now. But Apple, on the other hand, Apple ran iTunes. Okay, and so they had a lot of different services that were under me. They sold computers. Okay, and so they had great customer support. They had phone numbers. You could go. You could talk to people. And because they sold you stuff, they also had information beyond just like email addresses and things like that. They had your credit card number. They had your address. They had all sorts of things like that. So the adversary, they went over to Apple and said, okay, now I want to reset the password. And Apple said, okay, great. This is what we need. And I should say they actually called them. Okay, so they're talking to a human being. And they said, great. We need to know your username, so that's fine. We know the email address that we're trying to reset. We need to know your billing address. And so @Matt had a homepage, and it used to be the case, once again, things have changed a bit around this, but if you have a homepage, when you register the domain, you often listed your personal address with it. And so the adversary just went over to Whois, and they were able to find the address, and they provided it. It was the home address, and that matched the billing address. Then what they needed was the last 4 digits of the credit card that Matt Honan had used on Apple for his iTunes account or iCloud account or whatever. Okay, and the adversary didn't have that information. Okay, so now they're stuck. This should be at the end of the story, but they had another bright idea. They said, hey, I wonder if Matt Honan has an Amazon account. So they had the username, they had the billing address, they didn't have the last 4 digits of the credit card. So they went over to Amazon, and lo and behold, they tried to log in, and they saw that it was registered. They didn't know the password for the Amazon account, but they saw that he did have a Amazon account with one of these two email addresses. Okay, so they called up Amazon, and Amazon basically said the same thing. You want to reset your password? No problem. Just tell us your username. Tell us your billing address. He knew that information, or the adversary did, he or she. And what's the last 4 digits of the credit card that we have on file for you? And the adversary doesn't know that, so they're stuck. So this is where it gets absolutely brilliant. What the adversary decides to do is they hang up on Amazon and then they call back. And this time they say something different. They say, "Hi, I'm Matt Honan, and I want to add a new credit card to my account." Okay? Now, Amazon, if you go and you say, "I want to reset my password," they don't like it. They're very skeptical of that. They're going to ask you hard questions and make really sure it's you before they're going to reset your account. But if you call them up and you say, "Hey, I want to put another credit card on, my account, and I'm going to buy lots of stuff from you with this credit card," and like, what's the harm? Maybe someone's pretending to be Matt Honan, then they're going to give their credit card to Matt Honan's account, and then he can charge things to their account. Like there's no end game for why I shouldn't let you do this. Okay, so Amazon was very happy to add the credit card. They asked just for basic account information, and that was fine. Okay, so the adversary was able to add a new credit card to Matt Honan's account without much pushback from Amazon. All right, then what did they do? They decided, let's go back to Amazon and we'll do a password reset. And Amazon will say, "Okay, great. What's your username?" So I know that. "What's your billing address?" I know that. "What's the last 4 digits of your credit card?" Okay. I don't know it on the original credit card, but guess what? I just added a credit card to the account. Now there's 2 credit cards, and I know the last 4 digits of credit card 2 because I was the one that added it to the account. Okay. So Amazon said, "Great, you must be Matt Honan. Please reset your password." Okay, and so he reset the Amazon password, logged into Amazon, and then Amazon then went into credit card information, and Amazon's like, "We have 2 credit cards on file for you." Okay, there's the one that the adversary added, so they already knew it, and then there was the one that Matt Honan had added. Now, Amazon's not going to show you usually your credit card. Even when you save it in your profile, it doesn't often show it to you. It adds a bunch of stars. But just so in case you have more than one credit card, you want to keep them straight, it will show you the last 4 digits, right? All right, so he logged in and he saw, oh, this is the last 4 digits of Matt Honan's real credit card. All right, then they went back to Apple, and Apple said, "Hey, you want to reset your Apple? No problem. We just need your username, your billing address, and the last 4 digits of your credit card." Adversary doesn't know the full credit card information, but they do know the last 4 digits. All right, so they reset the Apple password. Then they go back to Gmail, and Gmail's like, "Okay, we sent a link to your Apple email. If you can click on that, we'll reset your Gmail." They now control the Apple email, so they reset the Gmail. And then they go back to Twitter. They reset the password. Twitter says, "We just sent a link to Gmail, and you control Gmail, and so we'll reset your password." Okay, so that's all good. Now, I wish the story sort of ended there. They were able to capture at Matt, and they did whatever. They spammed all his followers with it, and then they sold the handle because it was short for $10,000. Okay, but the adversary was a little more malicious, if you would say, or they might argue that they wanted to cover their tracks. And it's interesting because Matt Honan, he's a reporter, so he actually was able to have a conversation anonymous with the person that hacked their account. He basically messaged them after and said, "Hey, I'd like to learn how you did it." And then they sat down and they talked about it. But what the adversary did is on their way back up the stack, they said, "Oh, Apple has this interesting feature. They have this feature that if you ever lose your iPhone, you can securely erase it remotely. Or if you ever lose your laptop, you can securely remotely erase it, and you can do it from iCloud." And so the adversary, when they were in the process of going up and they were in the iCloud attack, they said, "Oh, we might get caught. Like Matt Honan might see these reset emails and catch us. So we'll just wipe his phone." And so it wiped his phone. And then the laptop is unusual. Usually it didn't have that remote feature, but just because of the timing of this attack, Apple had just rolled that out to laptops. And then after this, they quickly turned it off because they were able to reset his laptop. So he lost everything. He lost all his emails. He's a reporter, so he has all this contact information. He lost all of that. He had all his photos were stored in iCloud Photos, photos of his kid being born and growing up. He lost all his photos. And so basically his life got turned upside down because someone wanted his @Matt Twitter handle. So anyways, that's kind of a bummer or a down note to leave the class on, but take from it what you will. And next class, I'll tell you a couple more stories about social engineering.